Hi everybody, it's Mrs. Jarrett. Today I'm going to demonstrate a few watercolor techniques before you start to paint your self-portrait. You should all have a watercolor set in your art kit, so this shouldn't be a problem to use watercolors on your self-portrait. Now keep in mind, watercolors do work best on a thicker piece of paper, so hopefully you have some of that at home. If not, just do the best you can. It's not a big deal. So first I want you to try a couple techniques, and it's important to practice before we do anything on a good copy, just so we feel confident in what we're doing. So we're going to try 3 techniques: wet on wet, wet on dry, and dry brush. Now bear with me because I'm working on an easel, so hopefully gravity won't work against me. So before you start to paint, you need your water cup, paintbrush. Now I know in art class we normally have different sizes. I recommend a mama and a baby, so if you have 2 different sizes that would be great. If not, just use what you have. For these, let's use the mama, these practices. And you need your watercolors and a paper towel, of course. So the wet on wet, I'm going to start by wetting my paper. And if you want, you can break up a piece of paper like I have here to give yourself a nice practice area. So I'm actually putting a very light amount of water on my paper. And then I'm wetting my paint, whatever color I want to use for this practice. I want to put a little puddle of water in the painted area. Call that waking up the color. And then because my paper is wet, the paint's going to flow really nicely on the wet paper. The wet on wet technique is good, technique to use when you want to mix colors. So blue and green are next to each other on the color wheel, so I'm going to just add a little bit of green to my blue, and you can see the water really makes those 2 colors blend nicely. So that technique is called wet on wet. It's good for large areas in a painting. The wet on dry is kind of like your traditional watercolor painting. So I'm going to clean my brush before I change my color. My paper is dry, and I'm going to wet the color I want to use. Let's hop over here to this red. Now you can use whatever colors you want when you're practicing. So my paint is wet, my paper is dry, so that's why we call it wet on dry. So you can see that the paint doesn't glide as much on the paper. This is going to be good for smaller areas. You can still mix colors, they're just not going to flow as freely on your paper because the paper is dry. So you can see they just still mix nicely as well. So that's called wet on dry. And then up here we call dry brush. Now obviously with watercolor you need water to make the paint work. So you still need to wake up the color that you're going to use with a little puddle. But before you actually put the paint on the paper, you're going to soak the tip of your brush in your paper towel. And you want to try and get off as much water as possible so that your brush just has color on it. And if I use the tip of my brush when I do dry brush, there should be very little water that comes off. Dry brush will be very similar to as if you're using like a marker or a colored pencil, because you're able to really keep your lines skinny, dry, and defined. So this is really good for small areas where you don't want the water paints to run. In this case, the inside of our eyes would be a great spot for dry brush. Our eyebrows, things like that, tiny areas. So once you have those 3 those different techniques, you can practice 2 different skin tones. Now we want to use realistic colors on our self-portraits since we have drawn them realistically. So we want to try to create a realistic skin color. Now I recommend two different combinations of colors for that. So you need to decide whether you think your skin color is more peachy or if you have more of a natural tan in your skin. Now I know we're not quite into summer yet, and some of us might be more tan in the summer, so if you'd like to give yourself a tan, that's totally fine. But if you believe you're more of a peachy person, then you're going to use a different combination. So the yellow-red is going to be our peachy skin tones, because yellow and red is going to make like an orange, but we're going to keep it light. And then the yellow-brown is going to give us more of a tan. So I'll demo both, and you can practice both or pick one. But what's so important is both start with yellow. So we are not yellow, our skin tones obviously, but we're going to start with yellow. And we're going to start with a really pale yellow. So we're actually going to use the wet on wet technique for our skin tone. So I'm going to wet this area first, and I'm not coating it, I'm just using a little bit of water to dampen the paper. And then I'm going to wake up my yellow in my paint set, put a little puddle in there, and I want this yellow to be really, really light. So I want a yellow that's not a bright emoji yellow. I want it to be just a really pale yellow. And what'll happen is if I get something too dark, okay, I have a couple options. I can use water to thin it out. So just take some water on top. I'm trying to lighten this up. Or you can use your paper towel and you can blot it. Or you can do a little bit of both. So water and blotting. I'm going to turn this light out to see if that gives you a better view. Hold on one moment. I'm going to close my curtains to see what's a better view for you guys. I think the light out actually helps better. Sorry about that. Okay, so I know it's kind of hard to see, but that's actually the kind of yellow that we want, okay? We want a really, really pale yellow for both of them. Now I have to work quickly because I don't want this yellow to dry, okay? And you want it to be wet before I add the red. So I'm going to wake up the red in my paint set, and then I'm going to use dry brush. So I'm going to dab a lot of the red out, okay? And then I'm just going to put some little streaks of red. Now our skin tone doesn't look like that, but little streaks of red in there. And then I'm going to come back on top with water to blend it. Now, with all that talking did with the curtains, my paint did dry a little bit. But I think I'm able to thin it out there a little bit more. So hopefully you can see that. That would be good for the peachy, and if you think you need some more yellow, you can always come back in, but don't overdo the yellow. You definitely want a really pale color for the peach. Just doing this again because it dried up a little bit, so you do have to work quickly. Take that water to mix and blend those colors together. Okay, use your paper towel if you got too much on. Now the yellow, the tan option here, I want to start out the same way. So wet my paper. Wake up my yellow in my paint set. Okay, put that yellow on. If it gets too bright, no emoji yellow, just take that water to thin it out. Blot it with your paper towel. And then I'm going to wake up my brown to make a tanner skin tone. And I'm using that dry brush, so I want to try and get a lot of water out. And I'm just going to put some light streaks of brown. Oop, I got a little too much out there. Whoops. Whoops, bear with me. Got some purple on my brush, sorry. No purple people eaters here, just... So then some little streaks of brown. You've got too much there, that's okay. And I'm just going to blend it together. So give those a try. You might have to practice a couple times. When they dry, hopefully you'll be able to see a little bit more of a difference. So you can see my cards here for skin tones. They're not too far from each other, but this one's a little bit tanner and this one's a little bit peachier. So this practice is really important to do before you start painting your watercolor self-portrait. Let me know if you need any help with anything.